The preacher's words drifted across the dusty yard, but I barely heard them. My eyes were fixed on her. She was standing barefoot in the sun, her bonnet casting a shadow over bruises that hadn't had time to fade. Her father didn't even wait for the bidding to end. He shoved her forward like a sack of feed and turned his back before the gavel dropped. $19. That was the price. $1 for every year of her life. And me, a widower with nothing left but a sagging house and 2 gravestones under the cottonwood tree, had just bought myself a stranger. The crowd muttered behind their hands. Some laughed. The sheriff spat in the dirt and pretended not to notice her torn sleeve. I should have walked away. Lord knows I didn't need another mouth to feed. But something in her eyes, or rather, the way she refused to lift them, rooted me to the spot. She wouldn't look at me. Not then, not even when thunder rolled over the church roof and the wind kicked grit into our faces. I heard her whisper something so faint I thought I imagined it. Don't let them find me. Her parents' wagon was already a dust cloud on the horizon. She stood beside me, trembling, clutching her arms tight across her chest as if she expected another blow. I didn't reach for her. I only tipped my hat, led her toward the wagon, and climbed up without a word. She sat stiff beside me, her hands folded neatly in her lap, as though she was trying to remember how to be small enough not to notice. The ride home was silent except for the squeak of the wheels and the groan of the horse. I caught myself glancing at her more than once. A loose braid had come undone, strands whipping across her cheek. The sleeve of her dress hung half-torn, and when she shifted, I saw the ugly bruise blooming along her collarbone. By the time we reached my farm, the sun was sinking low and the air smelled of wheat dust. My house looked lonelier than ever, one window cracked, porch half-rotted. I wondered if she thought she'd leapt from one prison straight into another. She didn't step down until I did, and even then she hovered, as if unsure if she was allowed to move without permission. Inside, I said finally. My voice sounded rough, even to me. She flinched but followed, her bare feet scuffing the boards as she crossed the threshold. The place hadn't seen a woman's hand in years. Dust clung to the shelves, dishes stacked uneven. My late wife's sewing basket still sat untouched in the corner, like a ghost. The girl glanced at it, then quickly looked away. I set a plate of bread and beans on the table. She sat, hands folded, staring at the food as if it were a test. Eat, I said, softer this time. She picked at it carefully, chewing slow, never lifting her eyes. That night, I lay awake listening to the quiet creak of the floorboards from the small room I'd given her. Every sound sharpened my thoughts. I told myself I'd only done it to keep her out of worse hands. But lying there, staring at the rafters, I couldn't shake her whispered plea. Don't let them find me. Whoever she feared was still out there. And by bringing her home, I'd just invited that danger to my door. The first morning she was gone from her room before I woke. I found her outside on the porch, a rag in her hand, scrubbing at the dust-caked window until her knuckles bled pale. I hadn't asked her to. I hadn't asked her for anything. By the second day, she'd scrubbed the floors and set a pot to simmer with herbs I didn't recognize. On the third, she cooked biscuits. They came out hard as stone, but I ate every one. She never spoke, not a word, but I noticed things. The way she favored her right leg when she carried the water pail. The way her fingers curled strange when she gripped a spoon. Scars lived beneath her dress. I was sure of it, the kind that don't fade even if the skin heals. I tried once to ask her name. She mumbled something into her shoulder, so quiet I couldn't catch it. I called her Miss after that. She didn't correct me. Evenings were the strangest. She'd sit on the porch with her skirt tucked around her knees, sewing at torn curtains or patching her hem with clumsy thread. I'd take the chair beside her, coffee in hand, cigar unlit, and we'd sit in silence. Only it wasn't the silence of the auction yard, heavy and sharp. This one felt different. A pause instead of a wait. One evening a dish slipped from her hand and shattered against the stove. She froze, shoulders rigid, hands trembling. I saw the terror in her face, not of the broken plate, but of me, like she was bracing for the blow. We've got plenty of dishes, I said, calm as I could. She didn't move, her eyes wide and glassy. So I handed her the broom, slow, careful. She took it as if it might burn her. For the first time she met my eyes, just for a second. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The town didn't see it that way. They whispered about me, the widower who'd gone and bought himself a girl. In church pews, sewing circles, Behind saloon doors, they muttered that I was either a fool or something worse. The sheriff stopped by uninvited one afternoon, looking for trouble that wasn't there. I poured him coffee, said little, and let him see for himself. She stayed out back the whole time, hidden from his questions. Weeks passed, and the silence between us thinned. One afternoon I was mending the fence, and she brought me water. She stood there watching me hammer, her hands red from scrubbing, and finally said in a voice so soft I almost missed it, "That post's not straight." I stopped, looked at the post, then at her. "No," I said, "you're right." She blinked, caught off guard that I hadn't snapped. She pointed toward the base. "You need to shift the anchor. It leans left." I smiled, the first real one I'd felt in months. "Come show me." She hesitated, then stepped forward, bare feet in the dirt, and helped me steady the wood. For a flicker of a moment she smiled back. That night she sat on the porch without sewing. Just sat there, her knees tucked, watching the stars scatter across the black. It was then, in the hush of crickets and the creak of the porch boards, that I heard her whisper, "My name's Lahi." I nodded once. "Mine's Cole." She gave a small laugh, rusty like a door hinge. "I know," she said. We sat there with the silence stretched thin between us, and for the first time since my wife died, I felt something in the quiet that wasn't grief. The town didn't take kindly to secrets, and they liked hers even less than mine. Every time we came in for flour or nails, eyes followed us. Women nudged each other behind the fabric counter. Men leaned on porch rails, spitting tobacco, smirking like they knew something I didn't. I kept my head down, but I could feel her shrinking smaller with every step, bonnet pulled low, hands tied around the basket, as though it was the only thing holding her upright. The sheriff stopped me again after Sunday service. "Cole," he said, his voice thick with suspicion. "Folks say you've got her locked up out there. Say you bought her like cattle." I met his stare. "She's free to walk out whenever she pleases." "Is she?" His eyes slid past me toward the wagon where she sat waiting, head bowed. "She's got a choice now," I said. He didn't answer, just chewed the inside of his cheek before walking off. The whispers didn't stop. That night, I sat on the porch whittling. She joined me, needle in hand, working clumsy stitches into a rag. The dogs dozed under the steps. Crickets sang. After a long silence, she said softly, "They think I'm cursed." Her voice startled me more than the words. I set the carving down. "Who told you that?" "No one had to. I hear them." She didn't look up. Her jaw worked like she was chewing glass. "They said I don't belong, that I bring trouble." I wanted to tell her it was nonsense, but the way she said it, flat and certain, told me she'd been fed those lies for years. Later that week, she surprised me again. I was splitting kindling when she stepped close, her fingers twisting in her apron. "You ever wonder why I limp?" I looked at her, the pale scar under her jaw catching the sunlight. I figured it wasn't my place to ask. She stared at the ground. "Fire," she whispered. "My father locked me in after I made him angry. Mama pulled me out, but not before." Her voice trailed off. She touched her leg, then her jaw. "That's why." The axe handle nearly slipped from my hand. I swallowed hard, unsure what to say. She watched me carefully, braced for anger or pity. Instead, I said, "You're still here. That's what matters." For a heartbeat, she looked like she might cry, but she didn't. She just nodded once and turned back toward the house. From that day, something shifted. She still moved like a shadow, still flinched at sudden sounds, but she wasn't silent anymore. She started humming low while she cooked, soft broken tunes that didn't belong to any hymn I knew. And one night, when I thanked her for supper, she gave me a smile so quick I almost thought I'd imagined it. The town didn't see that change. They only saw what they wanted, a broken girl in a widower's house. And gossip, like weeds, has a way of growing until it chokes everything else. I didn't know it yet, but those whispers were about to call something dangerous down on both of us. The first sign of trouble was a black horse tied outside the saloon. The second was the man himself. Burke Concannon, tall, broad, with one bad eye that never stopped twitching. He carried himself like he owned every patch of dirt he stepped on. Folks said he'd drifted through towns before, leaving blood or debt behind, sometimes both. That day, he strolled down Main Street asking after a girl with a scar under her jaw and a limp in her step. Said her father had promised her to him, that she'd been bought once already but the deal wasn't done. By the time the news reached me, Burke was camped at the river with a bottle of rye and a Bowie knife he liked to sharpen slow by the fire. The boy who brought the news swore he heard Burke say he'd come calling soon. When I told Lahi, she went pale. She didn't cry, didn't speak, just stood on the porch staring down the road like she expected him that moment. I put a rifle in her hands. She held it like it might bite, but she held it. The next days were heavy. I worked the fields with one eye always fixed on the horizon. The dogs grew restless, ears pricked, growls low in their throats. Nights were worse. Every creak of the boards, every gust of wind against the shutters had us both awake, listening. One evening she finally broke the silence. "He wasn't just some man," she said, voice trembling. "My father promised me to him. Said I was wild. Said Burke would teach me to behave." She clenched her fists, then whispered, "I burned him once. Poured boiling water on his hand. My father beat me near dead for it. Mama hid me after. She made me run." I set down my cup, jaw tight. "You're not going back to him." Her eyes filled, though she didn't let the tears fall. "I don't want to run anymore." "You won't," I told her. "Not while I'm breathing." The look she gave me then was something new, a mix of fear and trust, fragile but real. But Burke wasn't the kind to sit quiet. He showed up in town a week later, not with a gun, but with a paper. A crude contract scribbled in her father's hand, naming him as her rightful guardian. He shoved it under the sheriff's nose, grinning. Girl was promised. I got claim. The sheriff didn't bite. He said Cole Hunter had taken her proper. Preacher signed the book himself. But Burke didn't leave. He laughed, called the town soft, and rode off with a promise on his lips. That night, when I walked the fence line, I found a noose swinging from the post. Rope fresh, not tied neat, swaying in the wind like a warning. I pulled it down and burned it. But I knew fire wouldn't chase him off. He was coming. And Lahi knew it too. When I returned to the house, her room was empty. On the hook by the door hung her apron, and on the back steps lay a broken jar of preserves, glass scattered like teeth in the dirt. She was gone. The tracks were easy enough to follow at first, bare boot prints pressed into the soft earth south of the wheat fields. One of the dogs had chased her halfway, then circled back, whining at my heels as if to beg me to bring her home. I saddled my horse without a word. Didn't tell the sheriff, didn't ask the preacher. Just rode. The sky was bruised with clouds, the air sharp with the smell of snow coming early. Each mile the trail grew harder to see, blurred by frost, then by drifts of white ash falling from the sky. 3 miles out, I found her, curled beneath a rock overhang, knees pulled tight, arms wrapped around herself. Her shawl hung useless around her shoulders. Her fingers were blue, her boots soaked through. She didn't stir when I dismounted, didn't look up when I knelt beside her in the snow. "I'm not here to take you back," I said softly. Her head stayed buried in her arms. The wind howled low through the canyon, carrying her ragged breaths. I didn't touch her. I just eased my coat around her shoulders, let my body block the worst of the cold. We sat like that until her shivering slowed, until at last she whispered, "He'll never stop." "I know," I said. I thought if I stayed quiet, if I obeyed, maybe they'd forget. But I was just a debt. Her voice cracked. "To my father, to Burke, even Mama. She told me to run, but she didn't come with me. I don't even know if she's alive." My jaw tightened. "You're not a debt, and you're not alone." For a long time she didn't move. Then she lifted her face just enough that I saw her eyes, hollow but searching. "Why are you here?" "Because you didn't deserve any of it," I said. "And I'm done watching good people left to rot." She didn't weep then. She just swallowed hard and nodded. When I rose, she rose too, stiff and slow. Step by step we walked back to the horse. I helped her into the saddle as if she were glass. The ride home was silent except for the creak of leather and the crunch of snow, but she leaned against my chest, just enough that I could feel her there. Back at the farm, I filled a tub with warm water, soap that smelled of pine. She bathed and dressed in one of my late wife's gowns, pale linen soft against her scarred skin. She wore it like a borrowed life, half reverence, half grief. When I set a bowl of soup and a biscuit before her, I said, "You don't have to talk. Just eat." That's when the tears came. Quiet, steady, falling into the broth as she lifted each spoonful. I didn't try to stop them. I just sat with her, hands folded, letting her fall apart without falling away. The townsfolk, of course, twisted it their way. Said she was unstable. Said I was a fool for taking her in. But a few older women, ones who'd seen worse, brought pies, mending thread, Even a hymnal left on the porch with a note, "You're welcome when you're ready." For the first time, she stayed outside after dark, not alone but beside me, knees tucked under her shawl. She didn't sew that night. She just sat breathing while I whittled a small sparrow in my lap. She watched my hands, firm but gentle, and whispered, "You don't ask questions." "No," I said. "Why not? Figured you'd tell me when you're ready." She looked down, then said, voice shaking, "I used to scream in my sleep." "I know. I haven't lately." "I know." Her eyes filled again. "Does that mean I'm better?" I looked at her for a long time. "No. It means you're safe." That was the night she cried again, but this time it wasn't from fear. Burke didn't vanish. He was a bad penny that kept turning up, rattling the town like a tin can in the wind. A week after I'd brought Lahi back from the canyon, he rode into Main Street red-faced and loud, waving that crooked contract like it meant something. "She belongs to me," he bellowed outside the mercantile, the fake paper clutched in his hand. "Her daddy signed it clean." The sheriff stood his ground with a shotgun resting casual across his arm. "That's not binding, Burke. You know it. Preacher signed her to Cole." Burke sneered, his one bad eye twitching. "Law don't mean a damn when a debt's owed. And she's a debt." I wanted to put a bullet between his teeth right there, but the town was watching. So I kept my voice even. "She owes you nothing." Burke smirked and leaned close enough for me to smell the whiskey on his breath. "We'll see about that." Then he spat in the dust and rode off. That night a noose turned up on our porch steps. Not rope this time, but wire, twisted cruel and sharp. Lahi stared at it without flinching. Then she bent down, gathered it in her hands, and dropped it in the fire herself. Days grew heavier. The whispers in town sharpened. Some folks said she was bringing this on herself, that I'd dragged trouble onto my own land. A bucket of pig's blood was left on our porch one morning. Lahi cleaned it up in silence. When I cursed, she shook her head. "That's their burden," she said quietly, "not mine." Still, I could see the weight pressing on her shoulders. At night, she read aloud from that hymnal the women had given her. Her voice cracked, but there was music underneath. Sometimes she'd pause, staring into the fire like she was back in that burning house, and I'd lay the sparrow carving beside her hand. She'd touch it, steady again. Then one morning, a letter came. No name, no return, just a shaky hand on cheap paper. Lahi read it at the kitchen table, her face pale. "It's my mother," she whispered. "She's alive. In Georgia. Sick. She says she's sorry. She wants me to come." I froze, the fence post half finished in my hands. "She says she tried to save me, that she left to protect me." Lahi's hands trembled around the paper. "She wants me to come." That night we argued, not loud, but raw. "She left you," I said, fists tight on the table. "She didn't protect you. She let you be sold." "She's still my mother," Lahi snapped, the most fire I'd ever heard in her voice. "I need to hear it. I need to know if any of it mattered." I looked at her then, truly looked, the scar under her jaw, the limp, the iron wrapped tight around her spine. And I knew she wouldn't be swayed. "Then I'll go with you," I said. She shook her head. "No, this is mine." At sunrise, she hitched my horse Bristle to a borrowed wagon, her mother's letter folded neat in her pocket. I carved a sparrow small enough for her palm and pressed it into her hand. "Come home," I said. She nodded once. "I will." Then she rode out, the wheels creaking into the dawn, and I stood there on the porch, watching the road swallow her. My gut told me Burke wasn't done, but so help me, I'd stand against every devil in the West before I let him take her. She came back 6 days later, thinner, quieter, carrying Georgia in her eyes like a weight too heavy to set down. She didn't speak of it, and I didn't ask. I only put a bowl of stew in front of her, slid a biscuit across the table, and she cried into the first spoonful. That night, she burned her mother's scarf in the same fire where she'd burned the dress. When the smoke cleared, she whispered, "I want to build something permanent." We set to it together. We rebuilt the cabin walls, painted the shutters yellow, built a barn strong enough to last through storms. She planted a garden, carved little wooden charms for each fence post. "Not a church," she said when I teased her. "A home." For the first time, her laughter sounded like it belonged. But peace never lasted long in the West. One morning, I found an envelope tucked into the fence post. No name, no seal, just one line scrawled in Burke's crooked hand. "You still owe me." The next week he returned. Not creeping, not hiding. He strode into town at noon, saloon doors banging behind him, eyes bright with that mean grin. He called her out loud enough for all to hear. Didn't think you'd still be here, girl. Thought you'd crawl off like your mama. I stepped out of the general store just as Lahi came down Main Street. She raised a hand to stop me before I could move in front of her. She wasn't shaking. Not anymore. Burke pulled the same crumpled paper from his pocket. Your daddy owed me, and when he gave you to me, that paid it clean. Don't matter if you burned the dress or kissed the rancher. A debt's a debt. His smirk widened. Unless you'd like to settle it other ways. Gasps rippled through the onlookers. Windows slammed shut. The street emptied save for a few stubborn witnesses. She owes you nothing, I said, my voice carrying stronger than I expected. Not her name, not her breath, not one damn thing. Burke's hand drifted toward his coat. The crowd braced for blood. I reached into my own coat, but not for a gun. For a folded deed. I held it high. This ranch is in her name now. Not mine. Not yours. Hers. Let it be known. I turned to the townsfolk watching from doorways and windows, that I choose her in daylight, in front of every eye that ever turned away. Not because she needs me, but because I need her. The words cut deeper than any bullet. Silence settled heavy. Even the judge's wife, pale at her parlor window, trembled but didn't look away. Burke glanced around, expecting someone to back him. No one did. The sheriff stood, shotgun in hand, but didn't need to raise it. The town had spoken with its silence. Burke spat in the dust, muttered curses, and turned his horse. The sound of his retreating hooves rang louder than gunfire. That night, it snowed for the first time in weeks. Lahi stood outside the barn, watching flakes settle in Bristle's mane. I joined her, arms crossed against the cold. You meant it? She asked quietly. I'll stand beside you, I said. In town or in exile, wherever you go. Her eyes softened. She looked at the ranch, the half-painted shutters, the garden under frost. Then she turned back to me. I don't want to go. I smiled small. Then stay. We married without preacher or pews, just a fire under the stars and vows spoken low enough the land itself was our witness. I carved her a ring from birchwood, rough and plain, but her smile made it shine brighter than gold. She wore a dress she'd sewn herself, linen soft against her skin, hair unbound and free. When she said I do, it was the first time I believed the West could give something back instead of only taking. The town softened after that. They didn't apologize, people rarely do, but they nodded when we passed. The blacksmith left sugar cubes for Bristle. The judge's wife sent a jar of peaches. Even the women who once whispered behind their hands asked after her garden. Lahi didn't need their forgiveness, but she took their gestures with quiet grace. Seasons turned. Our ranch doubled. Foals were born under storms and moonlight, their cries carried across the fields. Lahi carved wooden toys and kept them in a box until the day she didn't. Our daughter toddled barefoot through the wheat, with Bristle following like a bodyguard. We named her Maribel, after my mother. She had Lahi's eyes and my stubborn jaw, and when she laughed, it sounded like a hymn carried on the wind. Travelers began to stop at our gate, some for water, some for a meal, a few who never left. A widow with 3 sons found shelter in our barn one winter and stayed to help with the herd. A runaway boy earned his keep and grew into a man beneath our roof. Every soul who asked for rest, Lahi welcomed. When people wondered how it all began, she only said, with a broken girl and a quiet man and one hard winter that didn't kill either of them. Years passed, but the memory of that auction never left me. One evening, with the sky burning orange and Maribel chasing grasshoppers in the field, I said to her, I still remember the day I saw you standing there, barefoot in the dust. Lahi didn't flinch. She only squeezed my hand. And I remember the day you found me in the snow. Her voice was steady. The day I first felt safe. I looked at her then, truly looked, not at the scars, not at the limp, but at the life she had built around us. The home, the garden, the laughter of a child. She was no longer the girl I had bought. She was my wife, the heart of the ranch, the reason I still believed in mornings. The West doesn't forgive easily. It remembers every scar, every debt. But standing on that porch, her head resting against my shoulder, I knew one truth clear as the horizon. Whatever shadows still hunted us, we'd face them together. And that was enough.